Today, I'm mutilating a speaker for your entertainment on the internet. This is a very serious topic, guitar speakers. One of my favorite topics. I'm a real speaker head, man, because that's where the tone comes from, and I don't care about anything else. And if you care about anything else, sorry, but you're wrong. Speaker is tone, okay? End of discussion. Don't talk to me about pickups. Is that a hot take? Was that spicy enough? I hope so. So today I decided, in my quest for tone, to modify and mutilate and destroy a terrible little speaker, which I don't need. And if you think that I should have given this amp to a needy child, I've tried. I've tried giving it to children, and they give it back. So this video was heavily inspired by my good YouTube friend, the other John Brown, who has been doing some really excellent work on vintage 30s.
If it's worth doing, then it's probably worth overdoing.
Hey guys, it's Uncle Fester and I'm coming to you from my garage instead of my music room today because I've got something out of the ordinary planned. I'm neck deep in a project I've been preparing for almost 5 years now, a massive Celestion Vintage 30 speaker shootout, possibly the biggest one ever.
I highly recommend his channel. I will post a link in the description. He did an absolutely insane and excellent vintage 30 comparison across many decades. He measured everything, just crazy. He's been doing all sorts of good myth busting, doing some tests, doing speaker break-in, all that stuff. Can't recommend it highly enough. If you're into speakers and you're into graphs, this man, he's got you. And he's got a fantastic haircut. After watching his vintage 30 shootout and learning that the difference between a good V30 and a bad V30 is a few decibels of 5 or 6K or 4K or something like that, I thought, well, why don't I just try to modify a speaker and see if I can make some changes to it? Because maybe if the difference between a really good speaker and a bad one is not that extreme in the grand scheme of things, maybe we could find a trick to kind of juice up, modify, and soup up a so-so speaker, possibly. Or at least find out, perhaps, where tone comes from in the speaker. You may have also seen Glenn Fricker's video on the 2023 V30 and how it was great because it's got this transparent dust cap and suddenly V30s sound good again. You should go out and buy them. Well, I wanted to see if there's some truth to that because as John Brown found out, there is some good sounding 2023 V30s, that's for sure, but there's also some that don't sound so great. And so why that be? So I set up this little combo amp with a speaker as my subject, my experiment, my patient. And I decided to perform some acts of unspeakable horror upon it. I very carefully set up my microphone and my little speaker in such a way that they wouldn't move because that would invalidate all the results. So I had to be careful about that. Being that it's a combo amp, it's very easy to make IRs with this, but if and only if the amp is clean. So I did have to test that first. Yeah, the amp doesn't do anything. I mean, it makes stuff louder. So the first question I had was, how much effect does the Dustcap have? Because, again, with the whole Glenn Fricker thing with the Dustcap and then being different than other V30s, well, let's see. Is that true? Because I'm not so sure anymore. I don't know if that really affects it. Well, it does. It affects it somewhat because I cut the whole Dustcap out, and you can hear the results before and after in this little clip, as well as see the graph. So you can see what changes, because you don't really see a huge change, but you can indeed hear one. Now, for the demonstrations of the before and after of each step, those IRs were captured with a measurement microphone, which is very flat, and it wasn't in a really flattering and ideal position to be miking a cabinet. So those do sound bad. I will tell you that. They all sound bad. But what we're listening for is the difference. So the Dustcap does indeed contribute something to the sound of a speaker. It's not really surprising, but there could be some truth to having a different Dustcap, giving it a different sound. But it's really not as big as you'd think, considering we're going from a pretty stiff Dustcap here, as we started, to no Dustcap. We do hear a change in tone, but is it night and day? I don't think so. I do notice a difference in the highs, though the rest of the speaker remains pretty much unchanged. My little theory in this is that perhaps a Dustcap, especially a hard one, is reflecting sound waves around the speaker and what you hear in a slightly different way than if there is a very transparent or indeed no Dustcap. But maybe don't run out and cut the Dustcap off your speakers just yet, because I think that would also be bad for the speaker long term. It's there for a reason, to keep dust out of the sensitive center moving parts, which, yeah, if it gets dusty, it could wreck your speaker. So Dustcaps are good, okay? But maybe a transparent Dustcap, if there's such a thing, could be good. I don't know. You be the judge. Here's our starting waveform, and let's take a look at how this changes without the Dustcap. So that is the difference between having a complete and rather stiff Dustcap and no Dustcap at all. Is it hugely dramatic? No. We do see a decent dip here, right around 5.5K. But let's see how many decibels this is. About a 3 decibel difference at its most exaggerated, which is a decent amount. However, right at 5.5K, does that make a huge difference in the sound? Not enormous. We do see a little bit of roll off in these upper frequencies. And this is about 2 decibels here, maybe 3 on this. Does it smooth out the top end a little bit? Sure, it does cut out some like 4.5 to 5.5K. And then from about 6.5 to 10K, there's also a little reduction. So yeah, removing the Dustcap does darken the speaker a little bit, and that may be a good thing. The next thing I did was sanding the speaker cone with sandpaper. My theory here was that perhaps the difference in material between different cones, the manufacturing tolerance between the paper cones, could change, and we know it does change between even sequential serial numbers, again referencing John Brown and his tests. So what if making the speaker cone slightly lighter or softer by sanding it a little, removing some material, does that have a big difference? Well, no. And again, you can listen to the test in just a moment, but I will tell you, sanding it didn't have a big effect, and I tried to make sure that I removed a decent amount of material. It's hard to know exactly how much, how much of a difference I'm really making in terms of the total mass, but I went back and sanded it a second round even more aggressively, and again, didn't really make a very big difference. So I do think there's something to the manufacturing tolerances here and the exact paper pulp that day in that particular cone. I do think there's something to that, but as for making slight changes by sanding some layers off the surface, didn't really do much. Does that change anything? Basically not at all. Now, I actually had the most hopes originally for sanding because I thought it's kind of minimally destructive and maybe that could have a decent amount of difference, but we see hardly any difference, less than 1 dB. So sanding your speaker cone doesn't seem to really make a big difference. What if we sand it even more? Now we see a little bit more difference. It's still extremely minimal, and we're still looking at, that's like 1/3 of a decibel. This is barely audible, what we're doing here. Does this make this darker, brighter? It just kind of makes it a little different. Next up, I wanted to try the opposite of that. I used super glue, and I just kind of painted a thin layer all around the cone to stiffen it up and to make it a little harder and see if that would have an effect. And again, it does have some effect. It actually had more effect than the sanding, but it wasn't an enormous one. So here's the test before and after the super glue. Finally, my most wild and dangerous trick yet. I used a lot of hot glue and I drew a star. And that hot glue is going to add a lot of mass to the speaker and maybe some stiffening too, but mainly I think it adds weight and mass to the speaker, which is going to make it less efficient, which I did see in the graphs that it reduced the output of the speaker. The volume, of course, never changed throughout these tests, and most of these had pretty much zero effect on the overall output of the speaker, but the hot glue was a noticeable drop by, I think, around 2 or 3 decibels across the entire spectrum. So after leveling it out, we still do see a difference in tone. We do still see a more dramatic roll off in the highs. Now let's finally compare it all, and you'll have to watch the screen here to see what I'm doing, but I'll play you the before and after each step along the way, and we can see how everything sounds together. I didn't really expect any of this to be a positive effect on the speaker. I really just wanted to see what would happen, if anything would happen, and if I could draw some kind of conclusion about how we could maybe make a speaker a little darker or brighter by making some kind of modifications to the speaker itself. I would recommend against that, as you can probably imagine. I wouldn't go trying to modify your speakers. And the only reason I'm doing it to this one is because it's a tiny, crappy little speaker that I have no real use for, and so it makes for a good test subject. None of these made quite as dramatic of a difference as I had hoped for, and none of them exactly worked out the way I wanted either, in that I didn't see a particular isolated region that was being affected by any of these processes. They all changed things, and they all made certain frequencies quieter and other frequencies louder. But it's really hard to draw a general conclusion off of, say, softening a speaker cone makes it brighter or darker, or it reduces or adds 4K or something like that. It's really hard to make any kind of conclusion like that because all of these just changed the sound. Now, I do think in the case of this one particular speaker that after all the modifications were done, I liked the sound of it better than before. I think the two that really made the big difference were cutting off the dust cap and adding the hot glue. And the hot glue in particular, I think, did kind of help darken and thicken the speaker. Maybe adding the mass of the hot glue makes it sound a little bigger. It doesn't really change the fundamental, particularly it doesn't really change the low end, but it does kind of roll off the top end. That being said, none of this is really all that useful to anyone, but it is fun, isn't it? So let's make some IRs, and you can download these IRs and these blends, use them on your own track. Maybe make a terrible lo-fi black metal album with them. I don't know. Do whatever you want. I don't know if you learned anything from this. I'm not sure I did, but I did learn something. And that is that these things change the speaker somehow. And you probably shouldn't do them to any valuable speaker. So there is that. As always, thanks for watching. Smash like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.